Right, here's our second video in 8.1 on systems of equations. We just got done doing example number 1 and 2, where we took a word problem and we set up a system of equations that would help us solve for each of our unknown variables. Before we actually start to solve, let's talk about how we can tell if our answer is the correct solution. So if you look at example number 3, it asks us to determine whether the following ordered pairs are solutions to the following system. So they give us a system of equations here, 2x plus y equals 5 and 2x minus y equals 7. And then they've also give us a couple of ordered pairs, possible solutions. Well, when we solve and we get a solution, how can we double check that it's the right solution? Well, if you notice that it's an ordered pair, the first value is our x value, the second value is our y value. What we should be able to do is plug in the x value into both equations and the y value into both equations and make sure that it works for both equations. If it works for both, then I know it's the correct solution for that system. If it doesn't work for both, then it's not a solution to the system of equations. It might work for one or the other, but that doesn't mean it's the solution to the system. So if you look at A, I can take the system of equations, and wherever I see an x, I can plug in a 2. Wherever I see a y, I'm going to plug in a 1. So I'm going to take the first equation, and I'm going to rewrite it. And instead of putting an x, I'm going to substitute in a 2. And instead of putting a y, I'm going to substitute in a 1. So I have the equation 2 times 2 plus 1 equals 5. And we want to see if this is true. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. So 5 does equal 5. So it works for that equation. But we can't say that it's a solution yet unless it works for both of the equations. So we have to make sure that we plug in that ordered pair to the second equation as well. So I'm going to do that. In my second equation, wherever I see an x, I'm going to plug in a 2. And wherever I see a y, I'm going to plug in a 1. So I have this, 2 times 2 minus 1. And we want to figure out if that equals 7. Well, 2 times 2 is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. 3 does not equal 7. So it might have worked in the first equation, but it doesn't work in the second equation. So it's not a solution to the system of equations. What that means is that it might be a point on the first line, on this line, but it's not a point on the second line. And so in order for it to be a solution, it's got to be a point that works for both lines. Let's try B. Let's do the same thing where we can substitute in 4 for x and a 1 for y and see if it's a solution. Maybe you try this on your own. Pause the video, plug in 4 for x, plug in 1 for y, and determine if you think this is a solution to the system. All right, I'm going to plug in 4 for x and 1 for y in both equations. I'm going to simplify down. I've got 2 times 4 is 8. 8 plus 1 is 9. 9 is not the same thing as 5. So right off the bat, I know that it's not a solution to the system. I'll double check the other equation just in case. I have 2 times 4 is 8. 8 minus 1 is 7. So it works for one equation, but it doesn't work for the first equation. So I still have to say that it's not a solution to my system of equations. Try C. Pause the video, plug in 3 for x, negative 1 for y, and see if it works this time. All right, I plugged in 3 for x. I plugged in negative 1 for y. Now be careful with that double negative. For the first equation, I have 2 times 3, which is 6, and then I have 6 plus negative 1, or I can say 6 minus 1. I know that 6 minus 1 is 5, and 5 does equal 5, so the left side equals the right side, so it works for the first equation. Now let's see if it works for the second equation. When I plugged in 3 for x and a negative 1 for y, I got 2 times 3, which is 6. These two negatives here made me a positive, so I really have a 6 plus 1, which is 7. And look at that, 7 does equal 7, so I know that this is a solution to the system of equations. 3, negative 1 is the point that works in both the first equation and the second equation. Make sure that you can always determine if your solution is correct. You should be able to get 100% on this section or any section that deals with systems of equations, because as soon as you get an answer, you can easily, quickly plug it back into both equations and make sure that it works.